let's go ahead and get started. We'll call this work session to order, October 2nd, 6 p.m. First topic is voluntary transfer, and there is a new deck that has been added with some additional information from the conversation we had last week. Is there any commentary, Amy or Matt, to make on these couple of new slides?
I would just say slide 2 speaks to the fact of what we have to do under open enrollment. And so last time when we said, those things that might fall under good cause open enrollment exceptions, you can see what we have to abide by. And particularly those last 2 bullets are the ones that would make sense in our application. The rest of them really don't make sense. But if we were to proceed with some sort of restrictions, we would most likely want to leave it open to those last couple of bullets, whether there's harassment or bullying happening, or there's some sort of severe health needs that would require a different person. And then we also then were working to gather numbers about how many students would fit in those other circumstances that we want to consider. We have no choice with SINA. SINA we have to leave in place. But if we took the SINA numbers as well as those that were grandfathered from that 14-15 school year and forward, that totaled 57 students because some of those SINA students were also grandfathered students, so that's why they got combined. If we're talking about our current 5th graders that are on voluntary transfer that we would allow to stay in the buildings that they're currently in, that is 55 students. Lisa did note in there to me though that typically we would see some even movement from those kids out of district or whatever. And then this grant area attendance development process, so when we were meeting with the families up there and thinking through that zoning, there were several people that were concerned about multiple potential moves. And Steve oftentimes refers to the set of North Lincoln parents who want to count them being out at, the kiddos being out at the new Hoover building this year as a move. So if you think about being at Lincoln right now, zoned at Lincoln last year, out at the new Hoover building this year, zoned to Penn the following year, and then potentially, even though we don't have it in the F&P yet, another elementary building being built somewhere near Liberty High School, that would be 4 moves potentially for for a student within that short amount of time. So we talked to them at that time about an extended guarantee, and we talked to Van Allen parents and some Wickham parents too. The Van Allen South parents and the Wickham North parents would both be, okay, I gotta get this right, Van Allen would be zoned into Wickham, and those Wickham parents would be zoned into Penn. So Lincoln North would have been zoned to Penn, Wickham North would have been zoned to Penn, and Van Allen South would have been zoned to Wickham, but those people would have been in that circumstance potentially for multiple moves during their elementary career. So those are the numbers that we're talking about there. And then good cause is what we just spoke to. So questions about those numbers or that slide?
Is there any overlap between SINA, grandfathered, capstone with the last one?
So Adam, when he pulled those numbers up for me, did not include any, you just pulled K4 students, current K4 students.
Correct, and it only includes students who are in those attendance zones and attending that school. So the Lincoln North students are actually attending Lincoln right now.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The thing I don't know is if Lisa cross-referenced, I think she did though, those 55 capstone students against anyone that was grandfathered already.
You mean if those are unique students,
right.
if there's any overlap
Yeah.
between the 2 groups, right?
And that's it. I think the timeline then is just remaining from, or carried forward each time.
Comments or questions on that additional information? I'm sorry to have missed the conversation last week when we first presented the voluntary transfer information at the board meeting, and I think there was some discussion at the work session following. From the board members' perspective, what outstanding questions do we believe we have in order to keep moving this discussion forward? Right now we've got a goal of voting on this on October 23rd. I'm curious, do we need that much time? What's still outstanding? What questions do we need to have answered? What additional data do we need to see?
I think JP had raised a good question about staff members who open enrolled their students into the buildings that they worked in.
Yeah.
Do we know yet those numbers?
We don't think there's any way for us to grab that data.
Okay.
Because even if we had the student ID associated with that, what the names that they would have put on the voluntary transfer doesn't mean that they would have listed the parent that's the staff member to begin with. And then our ability to go in and take that the long list and try to match it up would just,
Be
we don't
too
have,
hard, okay.
we don't have the ability to do that.
Do you know if Steve's heard back from Joe on the other question I had, which is
Escaping you?
what?
Which is escaping you?
Right now escaping me, and it's what I'm most concerned about. I cannot think.
Then it was a legal question.
Oh my gosh, the one exception that I was looking for.
Okay, while you think, I
Yeah.
think,
God, I can't believe
much to Ruthina's point, I think one of the outstanding questions is, are there any exceptions that we would make
that's it.
to ending it? And if so, what are they? Right, I mean,
We had said the capstone kids is one.
yeah, and I mean, the staff members is a thing.
Is it-
And so I don't know if that's the only thing, or
The other
if it's.
one, the question I had was having so allowing people to transfer a one-way valve. So if they're transferring, kind of helps our end
Right,
goals.
right.
So if you're going into a high FRL school and you're not FRL, that, because I know, and that's some of my personal experiences, some of those families who choose to go into high FRL schools, frankly, are really active, they're really involved in school, they bring a lot kind of to it, and that's a choice that they've made, a deliberate choice of a family to go into a high FRL school. So that, and Steve said he thought there were policies out there that allow that sort of one-way valve, where if it helps your goals, if it gets you closer.
But
to
that
where
was
you
the
wanna
one
be.
that he needed to consult with Joe on?
In our one-to-one meeting, he said he was talking to Joe about it.
Okay.
So, I don't know.
Because I get it, I'm just having a bit of a knee-jerk, and I don't know why, reaction to that. It furthers our goals, and I completely support it, but if it's, I don't know, decisions, I don't know, I'm just having kind of a knee-jerk reaction to that, and I'm having obviously a hard time articulating the reasons for that.
No, I understand.
Isn't that what
mentioned
Waterloo
that
did
some
for
other-
diversity policy?
What?
I thought maybe Waterloo did that for diversity policy where students could transfer into, what's that, East and, I mean, they have the two high schools, right?
Yeah.
East and West, and there was one way I thought you were allowed to transfer, but not the other way.
Yeah, and that's what he mentioned, that we're probably just kind of a one-way valve.
Right, to
And
transfer.
And how is it working, and how does it?
Yeah, but I think my thinking on that is maybe incorrect, because it would have to be in reverse for them, that they would allow students to a lower FRL building, because East was so.
The Davenport superintendent at DPO in like April or something referenced that they have a diversity policy, and he referenced it being relation to transfers, which I assume would have to be voluntary transfers because the others bound by the state law, right?
But I actually think that in that IO code, that there is some mention of some districts having a diversity plan.
Yeah.
Well, he's having Joe look
Davenport,
at it,
Des
so I
Moines,
think, no,
Is it
that's.
listed?
Postville, Waterloo, and
I
West.
think Davenport has an agreement with neighboring districts too.
So do you think it's outside the district?
I think it is.
I think
I'm not
that's
100% sure, but
It's, yeah, open enrollment.
It's,
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
actually part of their good cause, things that you have to consider.
So at the 9th, then, we'll want information on staff and their kids. We'll want this information on the one-way valve
Mhm.
question or diversity policy that allows that sort of thing.
So we can't get the information on the staff. It's-
Right.
Oh, you
Yeah.
what?
Well, yeah, it would just be, we would just have to
Discussion.
decide.
What
That's a
about,
discussion.
Steve and I had discussed at one point in our meetings, the ICA's take on that part of it for staff.
That'd be good.
Steve had mentioned that there was some language in some other union contracts around doing it. I think it's specifically in a teacher contract versus all staff, but there was some precedent there that somebody had done it, but that wouldn't be my reason to do it because somebody else did it.
Yeah, unless it was wildly successful.
Supporting our staff, because we should. I think one other thing, well, a couple other things, I got a lot of things around it, but one, I I don't want to make the assumption, because we've been discussing voluntary transfer within the context of all the elementary work we've done. We never explicitly said, is it elementary and secondary that we're talking? We've never come out and said that it's all voluntary transfer, so I think we at least need to put that out there, as we either need to all, weigh in on it, or at least put it into the conversation so it's very clear to me and anyone listening which way we're going. And the big question that came up, and my question, I guess, specifically out of our last work session, was that, and I guess it would be centered on maybe the timeline as to when it would go into effect, because if we say no and then all of a sudden schools are too packed because there's not enough kids out of them, and we have yet to finish up the whatever boundary changes we're going to have to do, and schools are overloaded, that's just not going to work. So we either have to be thoughtful of when it takes effect, or be very aggressive in making sure that we push all these little building blocks around at the same time. Because one without the other is going to be a mess.
Didn't we have a slide at the last work session that had the years when these things would age out?
It was like 3, 2, and 1.
Or was that just something Steve was saying off?
He might have been saying that, but it is 3, 2, 1, so I gotta get it right.
The
The
sign is
grandfather
3.
kids would be 3, Sina 2. Hopefully I got that right. And the
I
capstone.
thought Sina was 3.
Maybe it's.
I thought it was top to bottom on the list, but maybe I'm.
I think it is. Yeah.
And then the grant area,
Oh, yeah.
attendance area development, that would take quite a few years to age out if they had a first grader next year, so.
Well, I don't think we've answered that question or had that discussion about if it's only elementary or not.
I guess I just assumed it was everything, but it was never stated elementary versus secondary or only elementary.
I brought it up with Steve in our 2-on-1, mostly because it makes sense that it's everybody, but there's very specific exemptions that we put in at the junior high level, right, for Kirkwood and Alexander. And does that come into play then if you shut it down for everyone? I mean, there's more to it than just a handful of kids here and there. And I'm not sure, did we get a breakdown of, was it like 700 kids across the district that are over, like how many is elementary
Something like that.
versus
Total. I don't
secondary?
I didn't
I
see
don't
the
think we've
breakdown.
seen anything on secondary, have we?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think internally, and probably the principal's attention to this has been centered around that secondary was an option to close that down from your discussion. So I think that would be good to clarify if you guys are considering shutting down voluntary transfer for all, or if it's out just elementary, or where that focus is.
That would
Yeah.
raise the level of discussion. I know
Yeah.
I'd have, because that's the issue at Northwest, right? If you shut it down, then a lot of those kids aren't participating in anything.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to North Central to participate in anything.
Yeah.
And that's an issue. And you're going to have a whole lot of people concerned about, frankly, sports at secondary level that are going to want to weigh in and have conversations about that.
And didn't we just pass an exception where people can transfer out of Liberty? So
Yeah.
that would.
Out but not in.
Capacity
Right,
reasons.
Right, they can go
That's
out,
what I'm saying,
but
they
they
can
can't
go out, but it's still
unless they
part of the
qualify through one of
voluntary
those open
transfer for secondary.
And Liberty's gonna be over capacity before long, so
Yeah.
we'd have to revisit it for sure if we.
I think if we're gonna stick to this aggressive timeline, I'd be fine kind of just keeping it at the elementary level and getting that solved and then dealing with secondary down the road. But if we're gonna open that up, then Phil's point about community comment is there's gonna be a lot more people wanting to comment and weigh in, I think, if we talk about eliminating the secondary level.
Do you have a take on it, Matt? I mean, based on the scope and what's happening
Yeah.
currently, and
I think from when I started here as a building principal, it was closed. I mean, we weren't allowed transfers anywhere, so that was kind of the norm, and I think that's what the community and our schools have become used to. I think the most high-level example you guys were talking about that would catch the most attention is exactly what you're talking about with the, Kirkwood students being able to access Northwest, and then kind of the special stipulations surrounding Liberty. We have a fair amount of Alexander students, that may access the transfer as well. Those are probably, obviously through the boundary discussions, those were kind of the two highlights, and those have probably been the two most that have taken advantage of our transfers. So it's kind of been renorming them to the ability that there are transfers now, and then also how that's affected athletic eligibility. We've worked through we spent a lot of time, trying to work through those since they're new again. I'm not sure I guess I probably shouldn't comment on the volume because I don't have numbers in front of me, but I don't think the volume's as high as what you're seeing in the elementaries as far as I'm accessing. A lot of kids are establishing that path in junior high one way or another, and then continuing on through their high school experience. But we could definitely pull some numbers around that and show you what the scale of that is and how many kids are accessing it, or how many families are choosing that option for their students.
Well,
And the numbers.
If it's pretty new, though, it feels almost, maybe we should kind of let it go for a bit and to your point, get the elementary piece done and then come back and reevaluate if there's more work we can do at the secondary level. Voluntary transfer might be a
I think it's a little disjoint your conversation, because my general perception is the people I talk to and the people I work with think this is pretty much an elementary
Just
focused
elementary,
conversation,
okay.
and if you guys step into the secondary piece,
Okay.
obviously it's your prerogative to do it, but I think that's just going to kind of turn over a new rock of
Okay.
conversation to do. So,
Well, and I do feel the sense of urgency and the timing around the elementary voluntary transfer discussion and decision. But then to your other point, the building block changes that have to go along with that to be ready for the 1920 school year. We've been saying it, there's not a whole lot of time. We've got our dates lined out for when we need to work through this stuff. We just may not have time to open up the secondary question, and we may not need to if we're really saying our focus is elementary equity at the moment.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the context of this discussion is changing boundaries and having students go to the new school that they're assigned to, not transferring out. Is that the reason we're discussing this? Also the history of it, but trying to get kids to go to the new school that they're assigned to, instead of undoing what we're trying to do.
right.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily the new school either. The school they're
Or
assigned
staying
to.
at the same school.
Well,
yeah.
the school they're assigned to. There's a lot of kids that live places that aren't going to the school they're assigned to.
I think you understand what I'm saying.
I do,
That
I'm
we're
just
talking about
saying.
it in this context, so I think we have to think about what is our purpose in this discussion. If we're thinking about secondary, that would be a different discussion, I think, in terms of purpose.
Different discussion. I don't think it's a different purpose. I think the work was put in to create secondary boundaries for the same reason. I think the purpose still is there, that you'd want people to go to the school you told them to go to because you did this work to make a boundary. I think our conversation has most definitely been, all right, we did some secondary work. Now we're targeting elementary right now, so if that's our focus, then we should do that. I want to make sure that, as the conversation rolls forward, we don't get to the board table and somebody makes a motion to close, transfer,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
all of it or none of it, and
Yeah,
everybody's like,
very,
wait, I thought we were doing one or the other. So
very
I
explicit.
think we need to at least
Really good.
hammer it out
We just need to
now.
add a word, elementary.
Yeah.
And it's the chicken or the egg, because if you don't know what the May 2016 decision looked like with everybody going to school where they lived, you can't be pushing around blocks, right? You could, based on who's sitting in their buildings right now, but most of those kiddos are in there on that just 1 year voluntary transfer promise, right? So you have to make a decision of how you want to look at your numbers.
And to what you were saying about, well, if you do secondary, well then community engagement is important. I say we got to get the community engaged. And of the 4 new members, there was, and I'd say with all the candidates that ran, there was unanimity in 3 readings. And I want to be explained how you're going to be consistent with that promise to the community, and what do you consider 3 readings, and when will the community have an opportunity to engage us? Because if it is at a work session, we're going to have to open up the work session to people to give comment. If it's a board meeting, then we're going to have 3 discussions at the board, or are you going to have a special meeting where the community can come in and engage? Because I think it's important.
So we had a discussion last Tuesday, the 25th. It's on the agenda next Tuesday, the 9th, for another
Talking about
discussion, and then the vote is scheduled for the 23rd. And there can still be discussion with an action item, I'm assuming. And if we need to invite, formally community members to our work session on the 9th, after we have the discussion item, I'm very happy to do that. We also have a work session scheduled for the 16th. And we can, again, invite community members to come and participate in those conversations, so that we've got, in my view, plenty of time to adhere to that sort of 3 reading concept, 3 board meetings, and then a number of work sessions where we can invite community members if we
So
want to.
community comment is what you're considering engagement with the community, the community comments at the board.
Community comment, listening to the discussion at the board table. That's board, 3 readings would be my take on that.
Okay. I just wanted that clarified.
I don't know what was said before I got here, but I would like to have, and I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to go. I would like to have a session with the community for them to hear about this before we vote on it, for transparency's sake. I would like the community to feel like they have some input on what we're doing. That's just me.
And I would agree with that as well. Because at a board meeting, there's no interactive discussion. And at a work session, you could get to that. But if we have a work session, would you open it up to 50 people? Would you open it up to 15? Would you open it up to 20? Would you open it up to 100?
Well, like I said last week, what I would suggest is that we put together maybe this exact presentation and we talk about what we're doing. We don't just say, tell us what you think, folks. We actually need to give some context of why we're having this discussion so that it's understood. It's not just, we're just making this random decision. That would be my thought.
Well, at the work session, we talked about trying to isolate this conversation, but the truth is we are doing this because of attendance area development. I mean, we're doing so to have it outside. I mean, I think it will be hard to isolate the voluntary transfer without saying, here's what we're looking at, is we are going to make some changes, or we're looking at making some changes, and we can't really make those changes and have them stick if we still have this policy. And I'm not against getting out in the community and talking. I've done, almost 10 of those meetings, and so I'm trying to be very transparent with this. I think we have to be. I think there's urgency, and if we want to go to 3 full board meeting readings, that pushes this into November, and then we don't move on our attendance area development until January. So I think the concept of 3 readings at a city, now this is what I know now that I didn't know as a candidate, is the amount of time and energy that this stuff is open to the public is a lot different than most, where you have staff who develop something and then puts it out to the council, and they don't, as far as I know, they don't have these sorts of sessions. I haven't seen the supervisors or any of the city councils go out and create 25 meetings to the community to try to explain their process.
And rationale.
And the other thing they don't have is they don't have kids showing up in August ready to go to school, where we have to have policies in place well before, like we don't get to pause, we don't get to say, well, we can wait on the start of school this year because we don't have these policies in place. And if this goes another year, then that means all of those kids who have an inequitable learning environment get it for another year. And I'm not comfortable with that.
Can I ask you guys a question that might get mad at me for? And I understand your point about the transparency around it, and I'm not lobbying for one or another, but do you think people that are supportive of you removing voluntary transfer would show up to that session? Because those are and the reason I ask it, let me tell you why, is because those are the people that just send their kids to the school they're probably assigned. So the only reason I would pitch that question to you is, who will you hear from at those community sessions,
And
right?
For me,
To
it's just
maybe-
important to hear from the people that want to be heard.
Right.
Even if they disagree. That's
So I just want to make clear, and I learned this the hard way a long, long time ago, when you ask for feedback, you have to be open to listening and making changes based on the feedback. And if we think that having the people, because the people that would show up would people who are currently enrolled in voluntary transfer and have like, students in that, will we be willing to make changes on getting rid of voluntary transfer or maybe some exceptions based on that input? And if we believe that the answer is yes, then I'm very open to having the meeting. If the answer is no, we basically think we've made up our mind, and because it's a wrong word, it's a foundation to create a baseline of attendance area upon which we can do other building block moves to help us get to our goal. If we don't believe our decision will change based on that kind of input, then I think it's a very bad thing to do.
I agree.
So I'm asking board members that question. If we have this session, will we be willing to make changes based on that input? Because if we're not, then it's setting up a false promise with our community members and asking for their input and saying, oh, sorry, I'm not going to do anything about it. Well, here were requests for many, 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 many exceptions. I think every family that would participate would be basically saying, I have a very special case and I need you board to make an exception for me. Are we willing to do that?
I mean, I
personally
know-
think that's going to be tough.
Yeah, I know. I definitely want to think about an exception for staff, and I want to think about an exception for people who are helping our end goals by going into schools that, I just know that
Yeah.
that's where I'm at. And even if that isn't the policy, but those are the things that I'm thinking about for exceptions. And the good cause, you know,
Yeah.
if there's a health reason, if you're bullied, I mean, those are, and frankly, we don't have a choice in those. Those
Right.
are legal requirements, and so. Now, if I'm also open to hearing from people who want to talk, even if I, and to explain my rationale or to, it's kind of like when I was talking about school pairing. Well, people who are against it say, you're not listening to the community. Well, but there's all these other community members we are listening to. So I'm not agreeing with your specific opinion, but that doesn't mean we're not listening.
So if it's a session to really outline the rationale, the reasons why, the criticality and the urgency, and just say it up front. We're not interested in making an exception for every family. I mean, I would find a nicer way of saying it, but that we're not here to create 700 exceptions. We're here to describe what we're doing and why, to help you understand the rationale, to listen to some of your concerns and give you a chance to provide vent or feedback or whatever families need to do. But I think we need to be very clear in setting expectations up front. We're not here to listen to create a long list of exceptions. So if that's the goal, then I'm okay with it. We'll just need to get a schedule.
I think to your original point, though, I think you've got to at least listen to, say to yourself, all right, if there is an exception that speaks to 200 of those 700 people, that might be a reasonable thing to look at, as opposed to 700 individual exceptions, right? But if you're not going to even entertain that, it's not giving a voice to the people, it's giving the appearance of the voice to
Right.
the people.
And
And so I
it's-
think
and it's
if
very
you've
cynical.
got to
I
be
don't-
able to go into it thinking, all right, somebody could change my mind. And I do that pretty much every meeting because I don't know what the heck's going on up here most of the time, but I voiced that same concern that Matt did at our work session, right? Because I found, as we've gone through talking about attendance area and things like that, we've been getting kind of the feedback on both sides of it because it's a big deal, right? And I'm concerned. Concern's maybe not the right word. I wouldn't expect to get the same duality in specifically tailoring it to voluntary transfer in a public forum type thing. I want to hear about multiple things, though. I don't know how easy it is to touch on all the various things in a public forum, and people can kind of pick and choose what they want to jump all over, right? If it's voluntary transfer, if it's pairing or boundary changes or whatever else. But I think if you just say, all right, we're going to have a forum on voluntary transfer, we're going to get yelled at for an hour, and then
I mean,
what do
I
you
think it's
do
going
with
to
that?
be just that, the session surrounding people wanting you to hear their story, which, I mean, every family would have a compelling story or concern for why they need this voluntary transfer. But as Janet stated, I mean, if we're just doing it for the appearance, and that's not going to, I mean, because pretty sure I heard most of us say, we know we have to do something about voluntary transfer in order to do all this other work. So I don't know if that's going to turn out in our best interest to spend an hour, 2 hours, and still move forward with some of the exceptions we talked about tonight. But we can say, well, they had a chance to talk, and that's it. That I don't think is going to go over well. I mean, I don't think we're in a good position either way. We do it and still move forward with changing voluntary transfers drastically, or we don't hold a public session and still do it. I mean, it's not going to be a situation that we're going to walk away as winners. I don't think in people's eyes that will be directly affected with that.
What if it's very, I don't know, targeted in that we go in and say, all right, voluntary transfer is up for being eliminated. We've discussed so far a couple of exceptions. You know, what would be compelling reasons to make an exception to the rule? And I think you'd at the very least either say, well, that's not a compelling reason, and that's not a compelling, or you may be like, oh, crap, that's a very good reason that I didn't think of. But that's what, if we were going to have one and listen to it, that's the mindset I would go in with, is to figure out, is there a good reason to create an exception that I'm not thinking of?
An exception that we would instantiate in policy,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's there for not just this family, but anyone else coming that has that particular circumstance.
And I would be okay with just saying, this is what we're looking at. This is where we're at with the policy. This is what we're planning on at this point. Just completely honest.
So my next question is, assuming or pretend this passes on the 23rd of October, what is the communication plan that we would use for families in the district? And to like inform, this is what's happening, and here's what you can expect, and I mean, what's the communication look like after the vote happens, if we change it?
So it depends on how tightly you would want to tie that back to the tenant zones, because if they're happening on top of each other, then we could certainly send out one set of communication talking about the zones changing, go to the homeschool lookups to see if your address has been impacted. Also, in the last 2 weeks, a decision has been made around voluntary transfers, and we could have that message go out the same, or we could stagger the messages depending on how you guys would want it relayed. But I do think communication is extremely important to get that out ahead. I think I shared with you last time that just that small group that moved from Horn to Weber, by the end of October, they were receiving letters around it. We followed up at the beginning of December with a lot more detailed information.
Yeah.
So having a community meeting, for the 23rd, and give us enough time to talk a little bit more with board and have some of our questions answered. With the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, somewhere
We would
around
need to be
there.
in that zone, 17th, 18th, something
I mean,
like
because
that.
I think we can go back and forth. I think we just need to say, yes, we're going to have something.
I don't know who all filled out the most recent doodle.
That's
Not the one from Longfellow, but the one from here.
The
that
PTOs?
Kim sent out.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was just dates that you were available. I don't think it's specifically said
The
anything.
doodle poll about, well, just that there had been requests for PTOs.
And I mentioned it last week that if people are available, maybe that can target a date of when something like this could happen. In my opinion, I know it's tight, but if we could do it before the work session on the 16th, so then we can talk about it
I
before
agree.
voting night, that would make me feel better, I guess. I don't remember how that
I
doodle poll
agree.
played
I
out.
think it's very important that we have an opportunity to discuss it before we're voting, because then it just feels too pressured at the table. For me, I like to have more time to discuss it. And I would suggest that it not be a situation where we're up front. We could start with a presentation, and then I would suggest that we break into table groups. As long as I've been on the board, that's how we've done all the forums, and I have found them to be way more comfortable than they were when I was on the other side, sitting in a crowd of 100 people with 7 people up there getting yelled at. So I found it much more productive. What I usually do what I've done at the forums in the past is I rotate around and I listen to all the different tables. Some of the board members chose a table and sat there for the whole time, so we had different ways that we did it.
So the Wednesday or Thursday, the 10th or 11th?
I thought we just talked about doing it.
I thought we said, actually, I'm hearing we want to do it before the work session on the
Right.
16th.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Can we pick a date that works for most people? I mean, go ahead and date, time, and then.
I can't do the 10th.
I don't have a calendar in front of me.
Because this is next week, we need to get
Yeah.
it a location, we ask for help finding a location. And, so you're not available the 10th, Phil, the 11th?
I think the 11th is okay, is good.
And what's a good time? Is this an evening activity, a late afternoon activity? Okay, like 6 o'clock kind of thing, people get off work?
Yeah, I think that's how we did. If we use the bell schedule model, weren't those 6 or 7 o'clock
I think we did
things?
6:30 to 7:30.
Yeah.
And you don't need to plan around me, but I'm sorry, I don't have a calendar with me, so I don't know about the 10th or the 11th. So
Did you fill out that doodle poll?
I did.
Can we
Yeah.
pull that up, Kim?
So if those were on there, then I did indicate there.
I don't remember what I was on there.
And I haven't done it yet, so, but I have my calendar in front of me.
And I know we have to hurry, but is that enough time for a community to say,
I'm coming.
I mean, we can have it and put it out there, but if it's also, I'm sure we could hear the feedback that, well, you threw that meeting out, nobody knew about it. I mean, it's, but again, would rather do it than not do it, so.
So what's more important, giving community members a little more time, or getting this in before the work session?
I would tell you my rationale for having it before the work session is that if we have it anytime after that work session and before we vote, I think we're all coming in to the board table to vote already having our mind made up, right? Without having any substantive conversation about it. Yes, we can have conversation at the board table at that point in time, but I think if we had the time to sit around this table and talk, then you had a whole nother week to chew on it before you're voting. I think that's more valuable for me, but if we are concerned about not having enough time to get people there, then that's kind of a moot point too, I guess. But that would be my reasoning.
I'm just, my schedule's all over the place. I don't have it memorized.
Oh, wait, no, she's 10 and 11, and she's good?
No.
I thought the green's good.
No.
The green
Oh,
is
green's
good.
good, duh, I
Yeah.
can't read.
I don't think there's anybody on the town.
The only
I
day
didn't
I'm
fill it out,
good
I
is-
can do the 10th, but I can do the 11th too.
That's the only day for me is the 11th.
And I can see if I can get off work early. I can't guarantee it, so.
So the 11th, 6 o'clock? And is this an all-district communication or targeted to families that are just in the voluntary transfer program?
I think it should be all
Probably,
district.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with
I think it should be all district.
Amy, can you see if you can get that in any elementary principals newsletters that go out on Friday, this Friday?
I'm not sure how many will be
Well,
going out on
all
Friday, but we
district
can do
for
it.
elementary
as a-
school.
We can do
All
just a
district for
blackboard
elementary
connect
schools,
for everybody.
not,
Yeah, oh,
Yes.
right.
not to,
right.
not to
Right,
secondary,
right,
so
right,
just to elementary.
Yeah.
But I think we have to notify everybody and not just,
We can just
People
do
in
a
the
blackboard
program. Right.
communication to
Yeah.
elementary families.
On Friday.
And at the ESC, depending on availability,
ESC.
or where you would
Right.
have it, I guess.
I mean, ESC's fine.
I can secure something.
Is that why
Big
you don't
enough?
have to?
A lot of
I'd
people
like
show
it if
up.
we could do one of the junior highs personally. Feel like it's more accessible.
I don't know how many people show up.
I don't care. Wherever we think is the best, most
I
conducive.
can check with Northwest and West Central. see what
Just say Northwest says that their libraries would be maybe a good fit. It's big. If you didn't want to use a cafeteria space or gym
the
space.
library is.
Yeah. We'll figure it out.
So Northwest, we think 6 to 8. 6 to 7 is an hour. I don't know how long these typically go.
I think 6 to 8 would be nice, actually. I'd be more likely to be able to make it if it were a little longer, so, personally.
And then we'll just see how it goes. It may not take that long, it may take that long. So 6 to 8 at a venue TBD, but maybe Northwest, and communications out to elementary families.
Friday.
You guys are all okay with Northwest if we can do Northwest?
Yeah, that worked well for the
JP is.
bell schedule discussion and that. And I think you want to also provide the first 2 slides of the presentation, since that's kind of the information we're working with. So the community can have a chance to look at that before they come in.
Are you saying up from the September 25th?
Yeah, if you could include those that show the aging out of the programs, and then these 2 from tonight.
I think that'll be confusing if we don't have some context to it, though.
Could we have a draft of the policy that we're thinking by next week? By our work session?
If you tell me what you're thinking, are you thinking those good exceptions that are on that slide? Limited to that right now?
JP had shared a couple other ones too.
Yeah, well, we talked about the staff one, and Steve was looking into the one-way valve.
It'd be hard to have a policy without having answers to all that, and it's what we're deciding.
Well,
I mean, it sounds like you guys are kind of unified on we would pattern after the open enrollment definitions, which we have to do. So,
Yeah.
those are given. We could also create something, say, under consideration.
Yeah.
Staff
Right.
exception,
Yeah.
what was the other one? Oh, the one-way
One-way
valve,
valve.
Maybe we could list those out as options, put
Yeah.
those on the slide.
The law is the law, and then these are other issues, these are other ones we're looking at.
Are there other things you guys would want us to put on there for things under consideration? Or?
One thing that I know is gonna come up, just in talking with Lisa, is a lot of people will check, or will speak to daycare issues on their form, so just be prepared for, lobbying for that.
daycare issues.
Just that it, maybe.
they got
before
in-home
school-
daycare
yeah,
near
in-home
their home,
daycare,
their school
or
that's not their
driving
home school.
To their job, and I don't know, it just, they will share that it's a daycare issue.
And people can appeal, right? So there are an option that you could appeal that.
Yeah, the appeal goes to Matt and Amy, depending on what grade it
Everybody
is, and then
appeals.
if they appeal that, it goes to the
Everyone
state.
feels, yeah.
That's what I was
everybody
thinking,
appeals.
as you look through that, and maybe I should be quiet, but as you look through those exceptions that we're starting to list, some of them are pretty black and white and easy to manage, right?
Mhm.
You start getting down to some of those other ones, and now it's becoming more and more of a judgment call, and you're constantly having to ask yourself, how do you make this process as fair as possible?
Yep.
And that gets tricky when you're talking about pervasive harassment and health, and if you start even treading into whatever, daycare, or whatever the next issue is, because everybody thinks they have a really good reason.
And it probably is a good reason for the family, and
Well,
it is really hard to make those calls.
We've had to make some of those decisions not on this level, but on busing decisions
Right.
to move forward, you know.
That's the
People
thing
have
with
good
more
reason.
exceptions, you know, the farther you get away from the intent of your policy too, right? And so I think that's the thing, because their exception will somehow, or their reasoning will somehow relate to that exception, you know, like Janet and Amy said, those are, people are claiming legitimate reasons. I mean, at some level there is a good reason they're asking for a transfer, right?
So I don't want to completely, sorry Phil, I didn't mean to completely shut down what you're asking for, but so going back to think about what needs to be in that message, how about we kind of start to work in constructing something and then maybe have Steve pass it through Janet and Paul before it goes out? Does that work?
And we're willing to see that for next Tuesday, or for the 16th?
I'd like it if we could see a draft before we go to the public with a discussion.
Yeah,
But
I'm
not-
talking about two different
But
things.
not for the board meeting on the 9th,
For the work session.
on the 9th.
Yeah.
I was jumping back to our messaging to our parents on
About the meeting.
Friday.
Right.
the 5th.
Yeah.
Yeah, if push off that until we have an opportunity to look at what, no, you go out to the people, let them know about the meeting, but as far as the information, if we kind of clean it up and have what we want to have in that presentation, I guess if we get a chance to look at that at the board meeting, that'd probably be proper before it gets pushed out to the public. But I mean, the state code and everything like that, I mean, we're not gonna be changing anything there. That's,
No, I think Amy and I would work on a message with Steve, and then maybe that can be shared with Janet and Paul just for another set of eyes on it that would go out on Friday.
Okay.
And then that would be the alert of the community meeting, and then we'd prepare something sample to bring you on Tuesday at the work session before it's presented to the community on Thursday.
Fair enough.
Does that work?
Yeah.
And just from a communication point, I mean, I mentioned at the last board meeting, but we are working on a board communication tool that if you guys like it, I mean, I've seen a sample of it now. It's a s'more. I mean, we'll talk about it more on Tuesday, but that's just gonna be another communication way to get out to people from the board.
So I would say that you don't, my personal opinion, you don't need to include the numbers of students.
Mhm.
I don't think that we need to get into that much detail.
So next Tuesday, are you hoping for two different documents? One, helping to put together a slideshow that could be used on Thursday night, and then two, a rough draft of a policy or a voluntary transfer form? Are you hoping to see those two things next Tuesday night?
I think seeing a rough draft of the policy next Tuesday would be amazing if it's feasible to do.
Okay.
Even if
It's
it's,
got TBDs for under
Yep,
consideration
exactly.
topics, because I think the discussion at the.
because I think the basic policy is pretty.
I think the basic policy is pretty straightforward. We already know the law-based exceptions and then these under considerations and, you know, and it's transparent.
We can, you know, it can come in a form too, it's just, this is superintendent recommendation. And then
I
we
think it's what we
can
do at
accept
the board meeting, not even at the work session. And we can continue the conversation at work session if we want to, but I would actually have that draft policy at the board meeting.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
okay.
Yeah, I just wasn't necessarily calling it a policy. This would be the superintendent's recommendation for voluntary transfers with all that stuff in there.
Yeah.
Do we have any update on the question that JP's asking, like when we might get an answer?
Sorry,
Do we have any time frame, like when Joe might get back to us on that?
I wasn't even aware of it.
I wasn't either. I'll ping Steve and
You
ask
just
him.
talked about it in our one-on-one meeting.
Okay, what else do we need to cover on voluntary transfer? I think we've got a good set of next steps identified. Is there anything else? Anything else from you guys on voluntary transfer?
Policy at the board meeting,
Draft, yeah.
presentation for the work
Work
session.
session.
And would they not be one inside the other? I mean, weren't you asking to have some sort of policy to have in the then presentation that you were gonna give on Thursday to say, here's what we're looking at. Like, it would be embedded in that. Same thing, right?
It could be two
I mean,
documents, I mean,
Most of
We
one
can
thing could
upload
just
it
be
both
in two
places,
different
too.
places.
It's kind of just where we attach it on board docs,
Yeah.
and then you guys can talk about what you want to talk about, but it both spots, so.
do that.
Okay.
Change my message.
There we go.
You're already
Put it in
on
both
it.
spots.
You're already on it, I can tell. Okay, anything else on voluntary transfer? Building blocks, we've got nothing here. My understanding, but again, I missed the meeting last week, is that we're really looking at baseline on voluntary transfer decision, understanding, agreeing on that, and then getting into the Rubik's Cube puzzle of, once we've got the baseline, this building block moves here, and the impact is this, so we have to move this building block in, you know, and I don't think we're prepared to do that work tonight, but I'm open to what
I
board
think
members want to talk about.
We have already targeted some areas, right? Like, something has to be done at Kirkwood if there's no voluntary transfer.
Yes,
That, right?
There's no
Like,
question.
people have to get out of
Right.
Kirkwood.
right.
There will.
So, I mean, we've talked about a specific block, you know, right? And we can keep going down that route. I mean, there has been talk of it.
I think Steve
going
had
to-
mentioned at our last work session, going through a physical exercise of the
maps.
maps
That was
and
Paul.
moving
Yeah.
people, well, one of them, Paul, Steve,
Superintendent,
You know,
board vice president.
yeah, but, so, I mean, clearly, I don't think we're
We don't
prepared to
have the
do that
maps
work
tonight.
but
Yeah.
is that something that we can do on Tuesday? I mean, because that's an exercise that I'm really interested in, seeing the visualization
Yes.
of moving all these moving parts.
Yep, we were working on, I was working with Steve to identify what some of those pieces are so we can have them kind of pre-built to make that go quickly when we do it. One thing I know Steve had talked about is when we do that, we'll probably need to do it in basically a closed session because some of the data that we may show may be privileged data.
Yeah.
It's one thing if we have very large blocks where it's all in the aggregate and it's fine, but if we draw a smaller area, it may show free reduced status, for instance. So that's
Yeah.
something that we would not do in an open session like this.
And this is probably a dumb question, but there's not like a box you can click to just have it not show that?
Not really, especially when that's one of the things that, you know, we generally want to look at when we build those blocks.
Yeah.
When could we do something like that?
I don't know. I mean, Steve and I are planning on working to develop some of those throughout the coming week. So we should have some of the blocks in place that would make that exercise actually efficient and doable pretty
So
quickly.
either the 9th or the 16th. It feels like maybe the 16th is better, but I'm no later than the 16th to have that tactile visualization of the blocks and the impacts of moving and the ripple effects and, you know, the aggregate of the blocks that we have to move to get us to what we want to do.
Yes.
Either the 9th or the 16th.
Yeah, to me, the 16th is probably the safer choice, simply in terms of getting, there's a decent amount of background work that goes into getting those pieces built so that we don't have to draw them all on the spot.
So we just need to schedule a work session, a closed session. Is that what
A
you're saying?
closed
I
session.
don't think we
But
can
I
have a
don't-
closed
yeah, I don't
session for
know.
that reason.
And-
By law, we're not allowed to,
Yeah,
we're not permitted to.
yeah, the tough thing is I know that from the districts, also by law in terms of who can have access to that information, it's basically on a need-to-know basis even within the district. So you as board members are included in that group. We have gotten legal guidance in the past saying that board members can see that sort of real-time area development that may include that sensitive information, but it's not something that we can show publicly. So
So why wouldn't we be able to do that then?
Because there's very specific
rules
rules
when we have
about
a
when you
closed
can have a
session.
closed session.
So isn't one of those rules like something that would affect property values? I mean, look, here's the truth. Either we're gonna say staff does this work without the board.
I hear you, but I'll tell you, there's one thing board members themselves can be sued for, and that's for having a closed session when you're not permitted to by law.
Then we are gonna have to, I think, then we have Adam and Steve do that work and bring it to us and show us what they came up with. 'Cause-
Show us options, or.
What about the data?
I mean,
Here's
we
the
can
best
ask
thing
Joe.
we
And we
Well,
can
some
show
of the data
Yeah, we
will
can
be
bring the data
aggregate,
in the aggregate.
In
I mean,
the
it's not a
aggregate.
problem because we've been producing that, as part of all of the
We
building block reports so far. It's
Can't
just a
tweak it
matter of
along the
actually
way,
having
right?
live data.
Right.
Again, it's one thing, like we actually had a board session, work session last year where we had some live data up. The difference was that we were dealing with big chunks of attendance zones. So we knew that the end was gonna be 300 kids or whatever. It's different with some of the ones that, I've been drawing as we go through this process, have been much smaller. So might draw an area where, there are only
10
two
families
children
or
who
two.
qualify for free reduced lunch, or maybe draw an area where there's nobody who doesn't. It can cut both ways.
So that's what I'm hearing is we can't literally do that work as a board. We can't tell them
Not,
this.
not as a
these-
7-group board.
We can't sit there in a work session and be like, here, carve off that little
Right.
corner there and see
But
what
we
happens.
could go in and do 3-person meetings with them.
Have a rolling kind of board meeting though.
Well,
Yeah, that's-
we'd probably want to check with Joe on it, but,
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be comfortable having you guys take a crack at it.
That's me too. Show
Because
us what
we've
you
talked
came
about,
up with.
I don't know, 7 or 8, 9, 10 different building blocks and
That's-
seen,
yep.
sort of the demographic and the impact and even options of this one to that school and this one to that school
And the way, Steve was describing it, to try to, so keeping things contiguous, right? And so wanting to do that, and then something like a pathway that sort of moves south to north, dominoes. And I would be, if there were, say, 10 or so building blocks and you guys came and said, this is what we think, I'm comfortable looking at that. And just,
And
having you guys
reacting
take a
and-
crack at it and just show us this is what we're thinking. I think I'm feeling comfortable knowing enough about which schools I feel are important to be impacted, that I'd trust you to say, well, this is gonna impact this school and here's what the percentage may look like. And if you wanna say that with or without voluntary transfer, cause I know that came up at the work session too.
I think it would have to be without, because otherwise it's fuzzy numbers.
Yep,
Yeah,
I agree,
so-
but somebody had mentioned at the work session to look at both. I would rather look at it without, for sure. And I'd be comfortable with you and Steve just taking a crack at that.
And these numbers aren't that big that they gave us, so I don't think they would have a huge impact on that.
Yeah.
I would
Right.
be very comfortable with you guys taking a crack at it, this inside and out, and then, and understand our direction and desire here. I think it'd be a hell of a lot more effective and efficient for you guys to take a crack and us to react to a presentation of what that would look like, as opposed to all of us sitting around trying to, collectively move dominoes. I just think that would be really difficult to manage. I can ask Steve if he's comfortable.
Yep, that's what I would suggest.
I think that's what his intention was.
It was? Okay, good.
That's what it sounded
When I
like.
talked with Steve last week, I got that impression that at the work session before that, right, we were like, okay, that school is gonna be too overcrowded, or
Yeah.
that one's gonna have just too high a numbers there, and I think we identified some, and my understanding was
did.
that's
So-
kind of what he and Adam were working
All
on,
right.
was
So
those very
16.
specific things. I think the goal was to have less than 10
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
building blocks that would have to move to still accomplish the goals. I like the idea of having something put together in a little package for me to then look at, because it helps alleviate my anxiety over the short time frame between deciding voluntary transfer and
building
boundaries,
blocks. Yeah.
right? Because that's a short time. So if we don't have to go through a 12-time iterative process of us saying, well, here, take that back and
Yeah,
change
I
that,
think it's good.
And if you're comfortable with the 16.
it would be faster.
I know when you're not here and Steve's here, he's like, well, I'm gonna check with Adam on that. See.
Yeah, but
So
if you're
you-
thinking it's
you're
cool,
comfortable.
then we're thinking it's cool
I think
too.
last week Steve said he'd have it done by tomorrow.
So I'm just
I thought he was gonna have
reminding
it for
the
tonight.
board, I'm reminding the board of
Yeah.
what we have on docket on the 16th. We have Ed Committee meeting first. Then there was a desire to have equity committee come to the beginning of the work session on the 23rd, sorry, 16th, sorry, and have, and I don't know if Steve confirmed that with Yolanda yet, but he was gonna ask, just so that they're not waiting around, and they would know they would be able to start, say, at, 6 o'clock, with the equity committee update, and then we would move into our regular, work session topics, voluntary transfer, building blocks, et cetera. And we'll have feedback from the community session that we'll want to be talking about around voluntary transfer. So it's going to be a long day. I'm putting that out there for us. We'll start at 4:30 and we'll probably go till 8:30. Just so mark your calendars. It's a busy night.
Just given the amount of work that we have to do, could we put the equity on a different agenda?
Possibly.
I mean, we have a very short time frame to make this decision, and we need to spend, if we can't get the information before the 16th, which is what I'm hearing, we have to spend significant time with it.
Were we just getting a update
It's
from the
one of the
equity
regular
committee? Or?
updates that they provide
It's
at
like
work
what
session now.
they've kind of been doing. They were doing it at the board meeting, and then we decided at the work session it would be a
Right.
little more productive to be able to have a conversation.
I don't want them to feel though like we're rushing to get through this so we can get on to the other thing. But your call. Whatever.
I'm comfortable with asking them to put it off.
I will pose the question. What was the topic that they had? Hang on. It was equity committee update on hiring data. So we'll present it off till
Another
the
next
subsequent.
work session.
All right.
We are having quite a few
Till the
of them.
23rd.
Could be the 23rd. I'll ask. I'll pose that to Steve. All right, equity committee, make sure I don't forget that. Okay, anything else then on building blocks? The 16th is the day. Good energy for you guys to come up with a really good recommendation. Let's see, what else? What's next on the agenda? I've got like 6 agendas open right now.
Hearing options, which there's nothing listed there, but the other piece I think that ties into it is the request from the PTOs to come in and discuss the pairing options with Longfellow, Shimmick, Twain, and
Borlaug.
yes.
Right.
So
Man.
Hoover.
Man.
That's
There's
also.
Yeah,
one
man-
request.
man would
I
be
mean,
the
there's been a
Shimmick
lot of
pair, so
asks from
I
groups.
mean,
What?
we've had some.
Hoover's. I mean, there's been a lot of asks from groups
Hoover,
that
so I
aren't
think
even
we
on
need
the
to get
list of
those
pairing.
scheduled.
To
So
talk about the whole thing.
here's a question. We've been talking an awful lot about needing to
Well, some of them are going to.
get the voluntary transfer
Longfellow,
stuff
too.
done. We've got a
Okay.
session that we're scheduling to get input on that. We've got, policy director, we want to vote on that, et cetera. We know we need to get these building blocks decided upon. The 16th is a big day for us. For me, making those decisions on the time frame that we need to give the administration team the time they need to communicate effectively, once we decide those building block changes, we're also going to have a slew of targeted outreach to those impacted neighborhoods, where I would personally want to go and set up meetings with these neighborhoods to talk about why and what the timeline and what you can expect. And so given the sense of urgency on voluntary transfers and the building blocks for the 1920 school year, we've already agreed as a board we're not going to be doing pairings for the 1920 school year. I would like to pose the question of, can we push out the pairing discussions for a couple of months until we can get through this work, and to do it well, and to be very, again, keenly communicative with the impacted families around whether it's voluntary transfer of the building blocks, and then, maybe it's in December, maybe it's, after the beginning of the new year, we pick up the pairing conversation in earnest, knowing we need to make a decision on that well in advance so that we can target the 2021 school year. But I just feel like if we continue the pairing discussions right now, there's just too many balls in the air.
And
we're not going to do it all well.
That's fine, but I think there has to be some type of communication
Yeah.
from the board explaining this to these families, because they've been hearing in the paper, the board is hearing this, or all these different scenarios that they're starting to feel ignored, deliberately ignored.
And worried what's gonna happen,
Yes,
the
that
hammer's gonna come down.
so I think
and-
there has to be, instead of single communication coming from a board member here or a board member there, it has to be agreed upon communication coming from
Fair enough.
the board that
Next-
spells that out, with
next
the exception
Wednesday
of Hoover. I think
Is
Hoover needs
DPO
to be-
meeting at Longfellow.
What?
DPO meeting at Longfellow next Wednesday. If we have a good, concise statement, there should be a rep there that we could say, here's the steps we're taking. We're having meetings now about voluntary transfer, and we're going to talk about building blocks, and farther down the road, we're going to, I mean, whatever
Whatever the
statement we
is.
want to put out there. I don't think it's the only way to get the information out there.
Right. I mean,
but
that
I
is a
think
good
it's,
way.
if we have it by next Wednesday, I think that would be a
Could we even
good
read that statement
time.
at the board meeting next
I
Tuesday?
guarantee you, because we're at Longfellow, we will have
Have more.
questions
Oh, gosh, yes.
anyway, so.
I mean, I think also we've been emailed by each one of those PSTOs. So just responding to
Yeah.
that, those folks that's like, hey, what about us? And trying to decide, because Hoover's situation was a little bit different, because we weren't talking about
Different because they
parent
don't know
now.
where they're going
But
to go to
we are.
school in 2019.
But we are talking about parents, because half or a third of those
Well,
kids
yeah.
might go Longfellow, some might
Yeah,
go Mayo.
and so I think they're wanting not just board members, they were more asking for administrators from the district to help come in and walk them through what does this mean for us. So I don't know if that is something that we would have to put off, or knowing that pairing isn't happening, if it happens at all, until 2021. Is it time to go in and talk to Hoover families? Because their reason is they want to get into their buildings, start setting up sort of activities with their new home schools.
So I've talked to the PTA president, I talked to
Okay.
Dennis. I meet monthly with a small group that's transitioning out to New Hoover, but all the Dominoes. And so coming tomorrow for the first time in that small group is Kathy
Okay.
Jenkins from Lucas and Eliza from Lemmy. But again, it's all going to be contingent upon,
Right,
do we have the
but
right
we
people at
do.
the table anymore?
Yeah.
But I'm going to go out to Hoover's PTO meeting first Thursday or second Thursday in November to address some of those things that are coming in
Okay.
that will come in that letter, right? So I think I spoke to this maybe a time or two ago, that I intend for those families to get one of 3 letters talking about, Hoover, historic year, the building closing, and then where their child has been assigned. So they're either getting right now, the man, the Longfellow, or the Lemmy letter.
Right.
Talk about BASP. Our BSP directors have been out. I'm talking to the Hoover BASP director to figure out where each of these families are currently going to be zoned to, and then if there's going to be space at these new buildings. And so those are all the things that we're doing behind the scenes right now.
Okay, and then I'm fine with that.
So
That
maybe-
sounds like it makes sense.
Maybe we add an item to the 9th meeting where we say, this is what our process is gonna be, and we have a statement that we just even say at the board meeting, and then use that to communicate at the DPO meeting the next day. We can, email out to all the personal requests we've
Make
got.
this a press release.
Yeah.
And that
Amy
this,
will be at the
this-
board meeting and
this-
she'll
this-
get it, so.
Well, but no,
Yeah.
you can make a formal, this is our timeline.
Yeah.
Voluntary transfer is what is going to be this time. And it's all going back to that short, medium, and long, and getting it reinforced so people aren't always going on, well, gosh, you've talked about this all summer. Well, yeah, but that was for something that's 2
Right.
years out.
Right.
So spelling it out clearly, so then you can always go back to, we understand concerns change is always an issue, but this is the map of how we're going forward with these decisions.
And if we do a press release, then we don't have to depend on their interpretation.
Exactly, and it, it's there, it's spelled out, and it can always be referred back to, and that.
Yeah. I'll take that action to talk to Steve about getting a statement drafted that we would
Are these the coffee
put
ones?
together
Yeah,
and
the coffee.
have as a vehicle for a press release to but so it's
Oh,
board
look,
table
two of
next
them fell out of the bag.
Tuesday. It's our
Just
TPO
passing this around.
standard.
Yep, and then you can get back and go to
You can put it on the
everybody.
website, or, you know, I could go,
I think there still needs to be at least a very short, direct response to some of those
Right.
emails, particularly one that is asking us to fill out a poll, right?
Yeah. And that's
For
what I'm talking
availability.
about.
I responded to that one saying, we have a doodle poll that we're looking at all these others, but
but it could be just a quick email with the thing attached. Thank you for your interest, we really appreciate it. We're talking about these things first, we'll get to the pairings, and I do think it's after the new year. I mean, I think that feels like a nice,
But I think, yeah, in that
Right.
conversation, you know, when we get to talking about the pairings, we will have very targeted
absolutely.
meetings in those areas.
Yeah.
Hoover is a weird one, but they
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
overlap all of it, right?
Right, and Amy has something scheduled. She'll yell if she needs somebody to come with her.
But it would be good to know if any of these building blocks that you guys are tossing around happen to be some of those Hoover people
Yeah.
who
I was
would
gonna say,
have been going to a
yeah.
different school and now, I mean, I don't know that they are, but
We're gonna know a
But-
lot more after November 13th.
Some of them.
Well,
to
and that
answer
meeting
that
is
question
on
for you.
November 8th. So maybe that meeting shouldn't occur until December. Because it's gonna be right ahead of what you guys decide on the 13th. But no, I'm happy to meet with them and just
Right.
talk them through all those things that we're
Yeah.
prepared to release.
I feel a lot better slowing down on pairing, just knowing that if we decide to do it, it is far out. And along the way, we're having these attendance area development conversations, frankly, often lead to some really good conversations and discussion as we're moving forward, and it includes some of this stuff.
I don't know that I would call it slowing down on pairing. I think it's,
Slowing down the urgency to get the
We're just-
info.
It's just our
like,
timeline. is-
right now, get it in October. I look at my calendar and it's like pretty packed. It's hardly shoehorn stuff in.
Also, I mean, I know if it's set up enough in advance, when I talked with the Hoover PTA president, they said they'd be willing to move meeting dates to make it work for us.
It'd be nice if it was that following Tuesday, but I think that's actually conferences, not conference week. Doesn't matter. We'll just make it work. They just want communication. I understand.
So we'll get a statement put together on pairing around timeline, well, transfer.
Yeah.
Priority one for 1920, voluntary transfer building blocks. Pairing discussions will pick up in earnest after the new year, and we'll engage, I'll talk to Steve about getting something crafted, we'll talk about it next Tuesday. We'll add that agenda item to the Tuesday meeting. Anything else on pairing? How about community and school outreach agenda?
Yeah, I spoke with the Sunrise Optimist this morning and a speaker. They meet every Tuesday morning. And one of their speakers will not be able to do it. They weren't exactly sure what meeting in October, but they've got 2 meetings coming up, 2 to 3 meetings coming up where they thought that could come in. And I'll volunteer to speak to them because they wanted me to speak to another issue as well. So.
Okay.
And with Henry Harper on the satellite police station, we're hoping to get something there before the end of the month as well. We just have to find a time when it works and when he thinks he can get the biggest group.
Okay. Are there any other meetings?
and the context of those are still sort of the big picture.
Right,
Yeah.
Why
right.
idea of
Exactly,
everything.
right, yeah. Although, you know, do you bring in the voluntary portion of it or just stick to that?
It's on one of the last slides of things we're considering is voluntary transfer,
Sure.
so it's there.
Yeah.
It's sort of been
I think
hand-waved up
if,
to this
you know,
point
if we
to a
have
certain
this
degree.
information kind of prepared at Tuesday's meeting and thing, I think, you know, if it's okay, just go ahead and bring that to that conversation as well.
Yep, that's good. And so the PTO meetings we just discussed, those are gonna be largely focused on the pairing conversations, and that'll happen, there'll be communication out, but I hope them not be worried about doing that right now.
As far as the DPO meeting next Wednesday, I actually got on our little, I think the last sign-up that had DPO meetings and some of the radio stuff, and it's still fairly empty. There's a lot of empty ones there, unless I was looking at an old one. And if anybody wants to come to Longfellow next Wednesday,
I would love to, but I think I've got.
I'd welcome a buddy.
I'm not sure I can
Sure.
make it, it's
Lunch?
Wednesday, you said, right?
Longfellow?
I can go.
Because I'm like, next Wednesday.
That's not ever an option for me.
Yeah, I know you had signed up on the ones that potential evenings. I don't know if you saw, I think they talked that the first one, they might have to move it to not be an evening one.
That would be unfortunate.
Well, it's in November, and it was the same time as the IASB convention.
Is that what it was?
Well, I'm not going.
Is that why they were moving?
I know, but like Steve will be there, and
Oh.
you guys will probably be there, and their representatives will be
So that's
small from the district.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
And
Yeah.
you're doing radio next Thursday.
The radio and.
Excuse me?
You're doing radio
slots.
next Thursday, according to the sign.
Yes, yes, yep, that's October
11th.
11th.
Yep.
Yes.
Next week to tomorrow.
Paul said he can come next Wednesday,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
I didn't just volunteer,
Yeah.
you said.
You did, but I also said I would.
What's that?
I said
Okay. Paul said he'd do every one of them.
I
Go
can't.
Oh,
Paul.
you said you do every
That-
one, man. He didn't say that. I was like, whoa.
I signed up for kind of every other one, but I hadn't really checked my calendar a whole lot, so I just assumed I could do it.
ISB is the 14th. That's
Yeah.
gonna be hard.
Yeah, I can't go to that one. I'll be
Yeah.
on.
Oh, yeah.
And I
That's
can't
right,
go.
why you're,
If it's in the evening, I can go.
well, yeah, they say possible.
Okay. Is there anything else on the meeting,
Can you
engagement
slow
thing?
down a little bit? 'Cause it's
Absolutely.
already,
I do think we're kind of at the point where we need to be figuring out if we're trying to schedule times to have a meeting to talk about voluntary transfer, and then we're gonna have one to start targeting building block stuff. I think the number of the overall meetings we've had needs to just stop.
I agree.
Right, I think we're kind of running out
we're starting to
of
get
time to
into
do
the
the,
targeted
yeah, we're moving
conversations.
into a whole different presentation
Yeah.
type thing.
I agree.
Except Center for Work and Justice needs to happen.
I mean, there's
Saturday.
still, the ones that are still scheduled for
Yeah.
sure, and there's a
And
few
I
other
see.
specific
And
ones.
when is that Center for Worker Justice?
1:30,
This weekend?
yeah, Saturday, yeah.
Hey, Kim, if people aren't signed up to go to either DPO or the radio or something, like the week before, can you just poke us all a little bit and be like, hey, there's a meeting next week, somebody needs to go?
Well,
Yeah, and
I
I
think
volunteered. I
it's
can do
Paul's
that.
job
Well,
to get
yeah.
us assigned.
Well, it's up there. Sign up. I don't want to force you to go to a day you can't go.
I mean,
I'll do
I
it.
went and
I'll
found
go
it
to
today
your
because I
home.
was specifically wondering if anybody else was coming to Longfellow next week because I knew I had signed up for it. But I had to go and hunt for it to figure out which random attached Excel sheet was the right one. And
Add
so,
it to your Google Drive, and then it's very easy to
yeah, I
access.
can't really get to Google Drive a whole lot unless I'm sitting at home on this computer, which is not
Is there
usually when
any-
I've got
So,
free time.
we're gonna all remind ourselves, if we haven't filled this out, to go fill this out.
We get blocked at work.
Take the action,
I
I've been
can't
very
get
bad
to
about
Google
that.
Drive.
Is there anything else on the outreach agenda? We agreed, it was already scheduled, we'll proceed, but our attention is really turning to these more targeted discussions. And then the last item was just a repeat of all the previous data that's been presented at various work sessions, just to organize the information. I don't think there's any discussion there. Is there anything else?
I'll just mention, Saturday, Lori and I went to meet with SUNY's Ranch
Yep.
Association. There were like 40 people there.
Wow.
They apologized because they had a death, and that's why that attendance was so low.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
It's amazing. We had
We
some
were
of the-
3 hours.
3 hours. Some of the
pretty cool.
best discussion, frankly, it was mostly about equity and what we're doing in equity, and we got some great. It's just I'm continually impressed about the engagement of the community and how much they care. Like that's it, their kids, that's their investment, and they're so concerned, and they're really. So it was great. It was a super 3 hours, but I mean going in, I'm like, oh, Saturday, you know, and then when I left, it was on cloud
It was
nine.
very energizing.
Very
That's
energizing.
fantastic.
We got some really great feedback on our equity work. People from Dubuque came and like, I'm stealing your comprehensive equity plan.
Wow.
Yeah, you guys are really like, because sometimes, I think we feel like we're not doing enough because we're always, but when people are like, you're on the cutting edge, just there's nobody who's doing this. So it feels good to get that kind of feedback.
Wow. That's really
And
good.
it wasn't like Pollyanna, they were asking hard questions and really pushing us on stuff. So it was really useful and great. So yeah, 40 people. We're sorry we couldn't get the turnout.
That's amazing, actually.
It's
Mhm.
on a Saturday
And
night at 7.
We had the translator, and that worked well, or?
Didn't
They
need
had
it.
one there.
We
They
had one.
provided one, but they didn't need it.
They were,
So,
the English was, everybody's English was great. So
She
it
had a
was-
lot of questions too.
She
so.
did, well, and she, former student,
Yeah.
and then there was a student from Northwest who then they had those sort of very specific questions like, why don't you get drugs out of our school? I was like, okay, let's talk about that. It was good.
But it was a good reminder that a meeting like that hits the community, because not everybody in the room had kids in school.
Right.
So they were asking us, so when are you going to come out and tell us as a community about boundaries? And I said, oh, there'll be notification through the school. And they're like, well, how else will we find out? Because we don't have kids in school. So they want to be part of the discussion.
And that's fantastic, because I think for me, that's, what we're doing affects the entire community. It's for the good of the entire community, not just families with students in
Yeah.
schools.
Well, and I think it speaks also to the strategy that we've had to target these different groups, because then we are getting a broader, when you talk to the Kiwanis, those aren't all parents, those are people who are involved in whatever in their daily lives. So I think it's been really an effective way to have open, we talk about making sausage in public, not a great image, but it's felt better, it's felt like a good process and transparent, so,
It's good.
yeah.
Anything else for the good of the cause this evening?
Do we want to have set some placeholders? Somebody mentioned earlier that they thought that maybe we were getting too close. When we scheduled the October 11th meeting, somebody asked, are we giving families enough notice of when the meeting is? So if we're asking that question now for October 11th, then maybe we should be putting something on the calendar for beyond that. Or else we'll be in the same situation.
I don't know what building blocks, though. I know we're gonna have to have the specific conversations around building blocks that we choose to move. We don't know what those are yet.
Do we want to just pick a date and say this is the meeting date, though? We don't know where, we don't know.
Oh, do it all together, one big giant, or multiple big giant.
Do you want us to propose some dates with Steve and bring him back next
Yeah,
week?
I think so.
Here's like a
Right.
potential timeline we could follow.
I mean, maybe if we don't do,
And then
say we
everybody
have
can
10
check
building
their-
blocks, if we don't do one big meeting, but maybe we do 2 or 3,
Yeah.
so we can cluster them, and that might, once we have those building blocks, we can start to think about where, so the junior highs or the high schools or
Yeah,
something.
maybe that would be good, if you could put some dates. And I guess we could just say, we've got meeting dates, we don't know the topics yet.
Yeah, we don't, yeah, but,
We can have.
I think that
a
information can
calendar.
come back with, if they're coming back with building block, like, kind of little packages, right? You can also say, all right, well, there's about 6 building blocks really close to each other near this area. That would be a good,
The high schools
Good
are
meeting
probably,
to have there.
because they're all located within, or junior high, either.
Okay, thank you for bringing some sample dates, options. Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye.
Go Cubs.
already losing.
What about?
Not sure that anyone's going to go worse.
Don't say that, Mel, cry.
I told you we were gonna set up a talk tonight.
Nothing. Chest check. 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 Nothing. Chest check.